Hey guys, wanted to make a short video. A couple weeks ago I shot a video for a problem I was having on my 2022 Triumph Speed Triple. And if you've got a 2021 or newer, this will probably relate to you. If you're dealing with other Triumphs, most likely this won't apply to you guys. But I did a video about some errors that I was receiving on my dash, and specifically check engine light errors, transmission fault errors, and a combination of those would typically put the bike into a limp mode profile, which if you've ever dealt with that, it's very difficult to ride when it's in that type of state. But all the error codes that I were able to dig out of the ECU all pointed back to every time the exhaust valve on this particular bike. So inside the top portion of the exhaust, there is, in the top pipe I should say, there is a small valve that opens and closes and is controlled through some cables running from a servo box up here. And one of the things you'll notice what I've installed here, which replaces this servo box and all these cables, is this Healtech module. It's a Healtech exhaust servo eliminator. So a Healtech exhaust servo eliminator. And that resolves the issue. So if you're like me, and I go into greater depth of my experience with this and diagnosing this in the rest of the video, so keep watching if you really want to understand the kind of problems I was having and seeing that led me to eventually resolving this issue by installing this Healtech module. So hopefully that helps you guys. I know there's a lot of people out there that have the 21, 22 models. They've been talking about it on the forums. I couldn't get a clear answer on these forums whether this Healtech was going to number one, fix the problem, but number two, I was really looking to try and determine if the Healtech module was going to change the character of the bike in any way. And I think in most part, the only thing it really did was it made the bike, or I should say the exhaust, a little throatier at lower idle speeds, and that's pretty much about it. I mean, I really don't notice any real difference in the riding characteristics. So keep watching the video if you want to learn more about this. You want to make sure that this is the type of problem you're dealing with. But the good news is Healtech, it's a low cost, under $100 US dollars. I think it's around maybe $60 for the module itself. So it's a cheap price to resolve this problem, which was an intermittent problem for me, and nothing's worse than trying to diagnose electronic type related intermittent problems, which for whatever reason, I'm not 100% sure why this is happening. I go into some ideas about that in the rest of the video. So that's it for now. That's the short version. Get yourself a Healtech, and hopefully it will solve your problems and solve those headaches that you might be dealing with if you've got a Triumph Speed Triple like what I have here. So I wanted to take a second and talk about this Triumph Speed Triple. There are plenty of videos out on YouTube and across the internet as far as reviews on this bike, and overall it gets really good, solid reviews, and a lot of people like the bike. I bought this bike off a private party, somebody who wasn't even the original owner. The original owner only had it for a couple hundred miles and then turned it back in, and then the person I purchased it from had it and rode it for roughly about 6,000 miles. And it's a 2022. And overall it's in really great shape. The guy took really good care of it, and the bike, when I picked it up, rode great. Way home, had no issues with it, but it wasn't until like about 2 or 3 weeks after owning the bike did I take it for a ride, and I no sooner left my house and I get two lights that two error codes that popped up on my on the dash on the TFT display. And those error codes, one was, first it was a check engine light, and then the next one that followed was a transmission fault error code. And long story short, I decided to go down the road to just see how the bike rode, and got on the freeway and realized the bike was in limp mode. And if you're not familiar with limp mode, it basically, depending on how the manufacturer sets it up, it limits the revs, how high you can rev the bike. So you're limited as to how fast you can go. And I'm sure they do that to protect the engine in the event that there is something that's pretty major related to whatever the error codes that are being thrown. So I was able to get the bike home, and the transmission fault code cleared after stopping and starting the bike, and then it took a few more times before the engine light, check engine light, cleared out. And yeah, to say I was a little bummed having just purchased the bike would be an understatement. Nobody likes to deal with problems on a brand new, somewhat brand new purchase like this, but I knew the problem wasn't fixed, and I knew it'd probably come back. And long story short, sure enough, it did a couple different times, but I was able to clear the codes. And by the way, clearing the codes, in some cases, they'll clear after a number of times of starting and riding the bike. But if you run into this problem and you don't have a dealer close by to take it to diagnose it, that's where you really will benefit from owning what's called the Tune ECU app, which is pretty popular among motorcyclists. It allows you to go in, clear things like the service icon if you're due for an oil change, but it also allows you to look at error codes, do additional diagnostics, be able to load in maps for the ECU, things of that nature. But clearing the codes is the big one. And I did another long ride a few weeks ago. Sure enough, I got the check engine light pop on, and then a transmission fault code came on. I was probably about an hour and a half from home. They wouldn't clear. I tried stopping, starting the bike multiple times, and it was getting late in the day, and I decided, well, I'm just going to ride this thing home in limp mode. And so I did, and I got it home. And one of the things you'll notice if you run into this problem, if you get the check engine light and you get the transmission fault code, you'll find that the Triumph Shift Assist, I think it's called, the TSA, the speed shifter, the fact that you get the transmission fault code, it disables that. So what does that mean? Well, it doesn't function as far as doing speed shifts up or down. You're just having to pull in the clutch to shift like you normally would on a normal motorcycle, which isn't a big deal. What I found, having ridden the bike for about an hour and a half that way, it shifted really hard. It was really hard. It took a lot of pressure on the shifter to put it up into the next gear with the clutch in. It wasn't fun. I got the bike home. I couldn't get the codes to clear after several days of trying, starting, and stopping. And I realized this thing was in kind of a serious, whatever it was, it finally kind of broken. All of the forums out there talk about the problem with this is with the exhaust servo. This exhaust valve. So within the exhaust system, there's a valve that opens and closes. And I think by default it is in the open position, but it can open and close at lower RPMs, I think, to supposedly increase the torque of the motorcycle. I don't know if it has something to do with emissions. Also, it very well could. All of the forums, everyone that was running into this problem was having the same type of issue, and a few of the dealers across the globe that were able to kind of figure it out ended up tracing it back, I think, to the exhaust servo. And if you look in the Tune ECU app and actually look at the error codes, the OBD error codes, they're general error codes, but they point to an exhaust servo valve, which is exactly what we're talking about here. This cover here, you've got two cables that come into this, and these cables come from this black box up here, which is the servo motor, and it operates and pulls those cables, flipping the valve open and closed within that. So one of the things you'll notice on mine is that one of the cables here has become kind of detached. At least the housing of the cable has become detached from this servo motor box. That's something I think that was there when I purchased the bike. I didn't notice it. I think the way that is set up, that it is, my guess is that's the problem. That cable is either getting kinked up within there because it's the housing that attaches to the servo motor box has kind of broken away and exposed part of the cable. These cables, there's not a lot of slack in them. So I think it got kind of binded up, and I think it may have just finally given out on that last ride that I did. I'd been reading about this on the forum and a lot of different ways people have addressed this. One of the ways, taking it to a dealer and having a dealer repair it. And I'm assuming they would have ended up replacing this entire servo motor and cable mechanism on the bike in order to fix it had I taken it in. I didn't want to go to the dealer. The dealers, bless their heart, a lot of them don't know what they're doing when it comes to working on these bikes, and they've got guys in there that are trial and erroring just like you are. One thing they do have is more advanced tools. I decided to take the route of purchasing a Healtech exhaust servo eliminator. And what it is, it's a tiny little device. You'll see here, a tiny little box that I've got mounted and sitting up on top of the servo motor. It takes the place of that entire servo motor. So basically, you unplug the plug that goes into the servo motor box, you plug it into the Healtech, and then in essence it fakes the bike out and thinking that the servo box is still attached and prevents it from throwing error codes and all of that. I've used one of these before on an old Aprilia RSV4 that I had mixed results with it. While it worked and I eliminated the whole servo, I can't remember why I ended up doing it. I was having problems of some sort with the Aprilia that I ended up taking the servo motor off. But I noticed that on my Aprilia, the fueling was not smooth as far as the delivery, and it wasn't 100%, but it ended up resolving the problem. So I was kind of, these Healtechs seemed to be okay. I wasn't super impressed by it. And that was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. So back to this, I decided, well, I'm gonna give this Healtech thing a try again. All of the guys have been talking about on the forum that have been using them sound like this has resolved the issue with the check engine light and the transmission fault. And I installed it, and sure enough, it did. It fixed all those error codes, cleared them all out. I've ridden this today and have not had one issue. The bike runs pretty much exactly the same as it did. Maybe the exhaust is a little throatier at idle, maybe, but or as you start to take off, but nothing that's of any significant difference. The response, everything, the motor, runs great. So I'm very happy, very glad that it didn't change the character of the bike a whole lot, if any. It didn't change it at all. So it's the responsiveness, the motor, the strength of the motor, all that, it's all there. So I didn't notice anything different, have not had any of those error codes, and basically by putting in this small little device, this Healtech, it replaces that servo motor box, those cables, and the housing there that connects to the exhaust to operate that valve in there. And you're probably asking, well, why do you still have all that stuff attached? Well, I wasn't quite sure if this was going to work or not. Most of the guys on the forum seem to have had good luck with the Healtech on this bike. Fortunately, I was too. So technically, I could go back in and remove all of that from the bike, and because I don't need it, it's not even operating. For right now, I'm just going to leave it on, run this Healtech for another 3 or 6 months to just see what kind of so make sure I don't have any issues of any sort related to this. But so I wanted to do a short video on it. There's only a handful of videos. There's 2 videos I think out there on YouTube that show the disassembly of one guy in particular, and I'll link his video because his video is really helpful for me to get an understanding of exactly what you had to do to get that servo motor black box out of the bike. It's a pain in the ass is what it is. It's just a massive pain in the ass, the way they've got it mounted to a bracket on the inside of the frame. And there are two little screws that are very difficult to get to, that require using either a really small micro ratchet or a L-shaped star T25 wrench to be able to get to these little things. They're a bit of a pain, but once you do get that all out, then, and this is all this is do is to get to that plug and disconnect the plug off the servo motor black box and plug it into the Healtech. And the plug plugs in on the top of this, but the way they had it set up, you couldn't just unplug it. You had to pull this whole black box out, and you had to separate. These are two parts here. You had to separate it so that you could get in there and actually disconnect that plug. It was definitely a pain in the ass. And like I said, I'll link the other guy's video. He goes into more detail, a lot more cussing, and you know, goes through the process on camera. I'm not 100% sure if that cable, the one that I have that is clearly has become disconnected from the servo motor box, or at least the housing, the sheathing on the outside of the cable has. And I mean, it seems like that is what's causing the problem. I know another guy on the forum mentioned something about his dealer indicating these cables were not of the proper length. And when you look at the way this is set up, you've got the cables are attached to a black box that's attached to the frame, and then the other cables are going down and connecting to the exhaust system. I don't know, it could very well just be the up and down motion of the bike that's putting stress on these cables. I'm not sure. It's definitely a problem. It's a problem I don't think Triumph is willing to acknowledge. They may have addressed it on the 23s and 24s. Mine's a 22. They may have addressed it on that particular bike, and it may be a problem that doesn't happen unless you're, you know, put a certain number of miles on the bike, ride over bumpy roads. I don't know what it will take to eventually have something like that eventually fail. The Healtech definitely seems like it fixes the problem. So hopefully anybody else that runs into that check engine light, followed up with a transmission fault, followed up with disabling their Triumph shift assist while they're riding, bike goes into limp mode. If you're dealing with that scenario, chances are it is this exhaust servo situation here. So hopefully that helps you guys. Others that end up either buying used or buying these new bikes and potentially running into that problem. All right. Leave your thoughts and comments below. Let me know if you're running into this issue and if you've got other ideas as to what may be causing it. But that's kind of my assumptions after riding this now for about 3 or 4 months and dealing with this problem. And hopefully it is behind me, because I really enjoy the bike and I don't want to be dealing with problems it's nobody does. So yeah, hopefully it'll be good from here on out. All right, guys, see you in the next video.